In a world where we are finally seeing a real competitive landscape develop in the life simulation gaming space, I can't help but feel that we need to continue discussing the mistakes that life simulation games have made in the past. In the last video in part 1, I talked about the community's contributions and how a lack of world management tools has led to a limited experience. Well, today, I want to continue that discussion and cover some new territory within that topic. So for those of you just discovering my channel, my name is Michael and I want to welcome you to Sovereign Gaming in Life Sims, the YouTube channel where I build worlds, lots, and share my thoughts on video games in the life simulation gaming space. Like I did in part 1 of this discussion, my points of reference for this discussion will continue to be the following franchises: The Sims and all of its iterations, Paralives, Inzoi, and of course Life by You. I think that the perfect place to continue this discussion is to continue off of what I was alluding to previously, which was the addiction to loading screens, or at least the potential presence of loading screens and what they serve. When I'm talking about loading screens, of course I can't really speak on any upcoming games as I simply do not know how present loading screens will be to those new video games. In other words, I have to reference The Sims and all of its iterations for this part. Now, when it comes to understanding loading screens within the Sims franchises, it's quite clear that there is an addiction here. This is EA's intervention. I'm just kidding. But anyways, this might surprise you, but I do earnestly believe that a loading screen does have a place and a time, even in future life simulation games. But EA Sims franchises really went overboard with loading screens. If we look at the very first life simulation game from EA, The Sims 1, objectively speaking, loading screens were put in place to send players to new neighborhoods with each new expansion pack, with the exception of The Sims Unleashed, which just expanded Neighborhood 1 all on its own. If you've watched any of my reviews of the Sims 1 franchise, you'll know that I refer to this formula as the Hot Date formula, as that was the first expansion pack of its kind to introduce this formula to the franchise that would be heralded and copied in future franchises. Now, The Sims 2 also copied and pasted this formula in its franchise as well, inserting a loading screen for nearly every expansion pack. By the time that The Sims 2's franchise was wrapping up, players were spending a significant time in the loading screens than they were actually playing their games. And when The Sims 3 released its franchise, EA kicked its addiction to loading screens, and they showed players that an open world concept is possible. And at the end of The Sims 3 franchise, and correct me if I'm wrong, but players really only had to deal with 3 loading screens from its 11 expansion pack franchise. Those loading screens coming with the World Adventures expansion pack, the University expansion pack, and the Into the Future expansion pack. Again, if I'm wrong on that one, feel free to correct me there, and of course I'm not counting like the title screen and all that when you actually start up your game. And then The Sims 4 came along and EA relapsed and they put a loading screen on absolutely everything. Like I mentioned previously, I do think that there is a time and a place for a loading screen. For example, I couldn't imagine a gaming studio expanding a neighborhood into an entire world just to fit in vacation destinations, so I get why there would be a loading screen in that instance. And where specifically EA Sims franchise got it wrong, especially in The Sims 4 where they really went off the rails with loading screens there, is that they have recreated expectations in a younger generation that they can get away with walking back loading screens so long as their video game looks pretty. And trust me, The Sims 4 did not look the way it did at its initial release. It also bears me repeating that even though The Sims 4 is just simply not my cup of tea, I fully support players that do get enjoyment out of it. If The Sims 4 is your vibe, absolutely lean into it if you're getting joy out of it. I'm not here to tell anybody how to play their games, what video games to play and all that. I'm just simply sharing my opinion, and I just wanted to mention that because in part 1, I really didn't take a moment to really support the players and to make it clear that my observations and feedback is indeed directed at the gaming studio, since it is my opinion that Sims 4 players are really overpaying for their gaming experience. Again, that's just an opinion of mine, If you're getting joy out of playing The Sims 4, absolutely do it. Don't let anybody tell you otherwise. Keep doing what you're doing if it's giving you joy and all that jazz. Now, the problem with creating an expectation or an addiction of the player base to loading screens is that it walks back what was successfully done 15 years ago to the age of life simulation games 20 years ago. It makes the open world concept harder to grasp for the general public, and worse, it lowers expectations of the player base, essentially granting permission for gaming developers to deliver half-baked open world concepts. Now, the immediate example that I want to share is the world of Inzoi. Now, I get it isn't a release game as of yet, so I understand that things can change, but even with the world being quote-unquote an open world, you're still limited by the lots. And in my opinion, you're really teased by a big city backdrop object. And a lot of the times, the background landscape is made to look a lot more interesting than the world itself. We also see this illusion played out in several of the Sims 4 worlds as well, and I have to ask, why not expand the player's gameplay to include those spaces as being playable? Why are players being given the less desired area to play in, as opposed to being able to play in the most interesting and grand areas of the world that was created? When we look back at the Inzoi world, those office buildings look huge, but will players ever eventually interact with them by the time the game releases? Or perhaps maybe it's part of some planned DLC to open up those different areas of the world. Will these areas eventually just be fun to look at, with the player being given a subpar part of the world to actually play in? And why has it been deemed acceptable to not give players the most desired grand or ambitious designs to actually play their life simulation games in? Sorry for the rant there, but that's kind of my opinion, especially when I look at Sims 4 worlds. I'm like, this part of the map is a lot more interesting than the actual parts you play in. Anyways, I think that the worst case scenario really sits right in front of our faces, and that could be the possibility of yet another walk back on an open world concept, being that those areas would be separated by a loading screen. So I think that The Sims 4 again does this pretty well in terms of walking back features that players were used to with its predecessors. And my thought is that if The Sims 3 was able to successfully pull off an open world concept 15 years ago, then there's really no excuse for gaming studios to deliver anything other than an open world concept with advances in technology and video game design existing today in 2023. Sure, The Sims 3 didn't run perfectly for everyone, but in my opinion, it does run better than The Sims 4 ever did with its loading screens. It delivers on a true open world concept, and with 15 years of advancement in video game design and computer technology, I really feel like an open world concept can run even better on the computers of the 2020s and beyond. The other place where I think that life simulation games are getting it wrong, that goes hand in hand with loading screens and world management tools, which I've already discussed in part 1, is designing worlds with limited lots to build on. I think that this is yet another product of a multi-billion-dollar corporation getting away with offering less features than it was doing before with its predecessors, and thus creating a new standard in the life simulation genre. The Sims 2 and The Sims 3, again, these are games that are 15 and 20 years old, at least allow players to place lots on the roadside, essentially empowering players to place as many lots as they want. I'm not familiar with any of the hard-coded limits there, so feel free to chime in below if there was a hard-code limit that I'm just not aware of. Every time a new world is offered in The Sims 4, the discussions on social media are always the same, in that users complain about how many lots they can play with, how many are empty, how many are occupied, and of course, the size of the lots too. On one hand, I don't think that when it comes to hard coding a lot limit in your world that you're going to please everyone. But on the other hand, if you just gave players the capabilities to add in their own lots to the world, you can shut down the conversation entirely. A conversation that generates a lot of negative sentiment, mind you. This will never be the reality for The Sims 4. And from what I know about Krafton's Inzoi, it looks like they will be doing the same thing, in that they are giving players a lot limit to play with within the gaming worlds that they design and offer you. And sure, maybe that's someone's cup of tea. And again, like if it's your cup of tea, I am not trying to shame you or downplay your preferences at all. You do you. I am completely cool with that. But as a gaming standard, I don't think that it's right for the general public. I know that I am speaking a lot about lot building and world building in these videos, and I get that those aspects of life simulation gaming doesn't appeal to everyone. However, as life simulation players, your gaming experience is directly shaped by both the world that you play in and the lots that you play your Sims characters in as well. And my next point on where I think life simulation games are getting it wrong will directly speak to that, and that is the use of rabbit holes and shell buildings. Rabbit holes and shell buildings in life simulation games were a phenomenon that was introduced in The Sims 3 just to show where the Sims would disappear to in the world neighborhood, since EA could no longer have Sims disappear in a vehicle or off screen to disappear where they go to work. Where rabbit holes are becoming an issue these days is that in The Sims 4 they are being sold to players as a gameplay feature, when in reality rabbit hole buildings are just 3D models that rely on the player's imaginations, substituting for actual gameplay. Like I mentioned before, in The Sims 4 franchise, this is a bigger problem now than it was back in The Sims 3. In The Sims 3, they're not talking about a rabbit hole being a main stage gameplay feature, whereas in The Sims 4, they do market leading with that. But a good thing that has come from the overabundance in rabbit holes is that it has highlighted that players truly want every aspect of their Sims lives to be interactive, especially for work and school. I mean, with The Sims 4, they again have released expansion packs based on this concept alone, and with The Sims 3, the Ambitions expansion pack gave us interactive careers, well, some interactive careers. Players have wanted interactive careers and interactive schools since The Sims 1, and I agree with the general community on this one, as this would feel like the true next frontier that the next generation of life simulation games really need to cover and at least attempt to present to players. I also feel like I can see two sides to the coin here as well. To build fully interactive careers is a gargantuan task for developers, as you have to design animations, career trees, events, and usually the setting that it takes place in, such as an office, so requiring a full-on build. This is clearly not impossible, as we have been promised fully interactive careers with Life by You and Inzoi, and I also believe with Paralives as well. But back to my point, I can honestly see the next generation of life simulation games, in lieu of rabbit hole careers, offer less built-out career options in their base game, and therefore in future expansion packs and DLC, build out more interactive careers and offer them in future packs. For example, I could see a developer offer players less careers, such as only offering like a police, a fire rescue career, an office job, a teacher job, and maybe like a retail cashier job in the base game, only to expand and add more careers as the franchise matures with expansion packs and DLC. I get it. This is probably something that you are immediately going to react and disagree with, but if players want to totally nix rabbit hole careers and make all careers fully interactive, then that puts a considerable amount of work on the developers, and the money and time that goes into making those careers interactive will either be reflected in the price of the base game, or the developer will choose to make more interactive careers as part of future DLC gameplay. This is a case where I am explicitly telling you that, as a community, we have to be careful for what we wish for, because there are indeed consequences and there's a reaction to what we are asking for. And while asking for interactive careers, which I think is reasonable from the fan base, it will indeed have consequences in order to deliver on that vision. And less careers at a base game launch would likely be one of those consequences if I'm just applying some foresight here. Now, again, please don't shoot the messenger here, because I am indeed just speculating the results and applying some foresight into what could be next from a developer's perspective. And at the end of the day, I do think that some sort of a compromise will have to be taken from both sides in order to achieve that vision together. Now, if I look at how careers are being presented to us, the players, in future life simulation games, the one game that I am indeed most curious about is Life by You. And the reason being for that is that in Life by You, we are being told that we will be able to create our own careers and job trees. However, more information needs to be revealed on how jobs and careers work in order for me to speculate on whether or not this will relieve some of the pressure by the Paradox Life by You team to create fully interactive careers throughout Life by You's franchise. In other words, I'm curious to know more about it, to really speculate on whether or not they're just going to hand it to the modders to just kind of run wild with it, or if it's something that they will continue to work on and develop, or something rather. Again, I just need more information on that one. If we look at Inzoi and Paralives, we get a bit of a different story where the developers are actually going to fully build the careers and jobs for us. And that's kind of where my point is more potent here, since those fully interactive jobs and careers have to be coded and created by a gaming studio, and they may face a production limit in terms of, effort and time and money and developers to actually work on it if they don't stretch out the career offerings across their franchises' expansion packs, or if they don't increase the price to reflect the extra effort that goes into making a bunch of careers fully interactive. I mean, listen, the doctor's job alone would create a ton of work for developers to get right, and players have been asking for fully interactive hospitals since The Sims 1. Don't get me wrong, Life by You also faces these challenges, but they have done themselves a favor in a way by placing career creation capabilities in the player's hands. How this actually plays out and gets executed is yet to be seen. I've already asked many questions about Life by You's careers and how that works in the game, and how other Life by You human characters will interact with new jobs, etc., etc. You can catch my many videos asking those questions there, as that is my number one question, really. And I haven't really talked about much gameplay. I'm gonna try that again. You guys, I haven't even talked about how much gameplay has to be created for fully interactive schools. I haven't even touched on that. Luckily, though, I did cover what that would look like in a previous video analyzing what gameplay demands a fully interactive school would have on Life by You. So again, you can check out that video if you would like. But I also just kind of wanted to touch upon shell buildings as well. They were, again, another gameplay phenomenon introduced to us in The Sims 3. And I have to be honest, I can see two sides to the coin with shell buildings as well. Do I think that it is gameplay-wise feasible to have a fully built out 50-story tall tower, or even a 25-story tall tower? Well, that's kind of where shells can come in handy, because if you can just design one floor and the rest of them is just kind of hidden, then you still have that high-rise building or even that mid-rise building. And you're still able to get that urban kind of gameplay setting played out here. So I do see how it makes urban gameplay a lot more feasible when it comes to shell buildings and other buildings as well, if I'm going to be completely honest. But at the same time, I think we are coming around to a time where it would be nice to have a shell building where you're able to unlock each floor if you so chose and wanted to. Again, Life by You is taking this one to the extreme in that they are placing no limits on the amount of floors that you can build. So you could actually build that 25-story tall tower, or even a 14 one. We haven't even seen something above 8 floors without cheats in other life simulation games, and Life by You is allowing you to do unlimited floors. So, it's one of those cases where I really do see both sides of the coin, why shell buildings would work for some games, why it wouldn't work for others. So again, feel free to share how you feel about shell buildings in a comment below if you feel inclined to do so. Moving on, I wanted to briefly touch on how I think that paywalls, microtransactions, and forced online play are big mistakes in PC life simulation video games. Truth be told, I'm not well versed with Project Renee or The Sims 5 or whatever EA is calling it these days, but from the very few things that I have seen about it, there are some murmurings and rumors at best that it might have a lot to do with microtransactions. Again, those are rumors, it's gossip, it's not a fact, it's just things that I've kind of seen, and I haven't even been doing a whole lot of research into Project Renee. Since I am not that well versed with Project Renee, I am choosing not to speak about it in this video, but feel free to comment below if you guys want me to do a deep dive into it in a future video. I'd be more than happy to do that for you guys. So if a future life simulation game wants to kill their fan base off quickly, then I think that implementing microtransactions in your PC video game is certainly the way to go. In my opinion, life simulation gamers have been pilfered and nickel and dimed enough, and on some level they do know it themselves. Sure, life simulation players are willing to spend their money, and again, I'm not telling you guys how to spend your money. You are free to make those decisions on your own. You are free to be accountable for all of that, so I'm not judging it. I'm just observing here. And even though I think that in general, life simulation players have kind of overpaid for a lot of the experiences. That goes beyond The Sims 4 as well. I think that there were some moments in The Sims 3 where I think that players overpaid, but I'm kind of getting distracted here. But anyways, sure, life simulation players are willing to spend their money. But just because they have kept the Sims afloat for the last 23 years, it doesn't mean that microtransactions won't be the last straw. Even now, Simmers are picking and choosing their games, and I even ran a poll last week on my channel just to see what you guys were all playing. And you can still vote if you want to. I'm not shutting down that poll anytime soon. And just based on the responses that I got, players are really all over the place with no game really taking the lead in terms of the votes. And even though this poll of mine would have been just a small sample from the life simulation gamers, I kind of feel that this is the general sentiment, in that players are now picking and choosing the life simulation game that suits them best. And honestly, I love that. Everyone knows that microtransactions add up considerably. And I'm saying it right here, right now, that the first PC life simulation game that introduces microtransactions will dig its own grave. We're in the craziest economic times of our lives right now, and if a video game really wants to see how quickly it can unalive itself, it should just slap a microtransaction on basic gameplay features or on DLC and, add another expense to someone's monthly bill. And if that game really wants to unalive itself on turbo speed, then it can combine microtransactions with forced online gameplay. Okay, I'm done being funny, but although it has never been confirmed, a lot of players are suspicious that inZOI will introduce microtransactions at some point in their game. Again, microtransactions are unconfirmed to be present in inZOI and Project Renee at this time, as far as I know. And if it has been confirmed, then feel free to drop a comment with a link that takes me directly to the developer confirming this. So yeah, even though I am just discussing microtransactions in a spirited way, to say the very least, if you guys couldn't tell, I'm not a fan of microtransactions at all, especially in this day and age. Yeah, even though I am speaking it with a lot of spirit and gusto, none of it has been confirmed, and that's really kind of the saving grace here. In other words, save the microtransactions for the mobile games where I feel that they belong. As for forced online gameplay in a life simulation game context, I hate it if it's forced online gameplay. And if online gameplay is available as an additional mode and not forced on the player, then I can keep an open mind to it. But in my opinion, the minute online gameplay is forced on the player, it drives yet another nail into the coffin for a lot of players. And although, to be fair, this might be a feature that certain players want, I'm just talking about the general sentiments of life simulation players towards forced online play. And yes, I would consider needing to be logged in and connected to an app that has to be connected to internet, forced online play. And I'm looking at you, EA app, you're dangerously close to treading in that territory. So if there's any kind of inconvenient apps that you're forced to download to play your games, it's kind of a no-no for me. And I think that with real competition building in the life simulation gaming space, that players would actually take this more into consideration than they have before. We all have issues with the EA app and how it mysteriously adjusts your settings whenever you're not looking at it. And it's always conflicted with games, and older games especially, it hates. So yeah, those kind of apps need to go. At least with Steam, you can actually go into like an offline mode. So if you're not connected to internet, at least you can still play your games. And even then, like, I'm not entirely thrilled about needing to be online, logged into Steam. So that's just me. I'm not talking smack about Steam because that's just my own personal preference there. But yeah, I'm kind of getting ahead of myself and distracting the video. Surprisingly, another gameplay feature that I don't think life simulation games are getting it correct are vehicles. Vehicles are non-existent in The Sims 4, surprise, surprise, and I would argue that functionally speaking, they made no difference in The Sims 2 since the player would have to go through a loading screen anyways to travel outside of their home lot. In my opinion, one of the only points of reference for legit vehicle gameplay is The Sims 3, since there was an actual gameplay purpose and function to owning a vehicle. But just because The Sims 3 actually gave a proper purpose to vehicles in its game, it doesn't mean that they got it perfectly. The first departure from realism was really the concept of pocket cars, where Sims would store vehicles in their inventory to whip out of nowhere. Or seemingly nowhere. We knew it went into their inventories. Sure, if they didn't have pocket car capabilities, then the game would force the players to take parking into consideration when building the lots and possibly even with the construction of the roads. But the other problem with the Sims 3 vehicles is that their speeds were pretty crazy. Luckily, there are mods that exist to help give vehicles realistic speeds, but that again is depending on the modder community to make your game better, and that's not necessarily something that I totally agree with. But I also really love the fact that, you know, if you give your modder community the tools right from the jump, that you are indeed creating a deeper relationship with your players. Perhaps that's another video for another time. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not complaining about The Sims 3's vehicle gameplay, as at the time, it was miles ahead of The Sims 2. It does, however, serve as a point of reference for future life simulation games to refer to, and I would even argue it sets the bar. And I'm not sure if those life simulation games are really learning from the shortcomings of The Sims 3's vehicle gameplay, or even revering the bar that it has set for future expectations. For example, within Zoe, you can get hit by a car, but you can't actually drive one at this time. And, you know, to be fair, like, I'm pretty sure I might have read somewhere that they are looking into driving gameplay and all that within Zoe, so maybe I'm being a little unfair with that one. But with Life by You, it does indeed look like it is an evolved Sims 3 vehicle gameplay mechanic. And with its first-person mode with Life by You, you can indeed technically drive a car on your keyboard, which is pretty great. It's a step in a new direction. And there are also parking mechanics and logistics. Heck, it even has a pocket car mechanic that players can take advantage of if they really don't care for parking. The animations, which is told by the developers time and time again, are still a work in progress, and we are just leading up to the early access version of Life by You. We're not actually leading up to the base game release this March. And with Paralives, just from the brief research that I have done, it looks like their vehicle gameplay mechanics will function similarly to The Sims 3. Again, please correct me here if I'm wrong. Paralives is a video game that I'm not very well versed with in terms of like research and all of that, so I try not to speak too much on Paralives or even in Zoe until I do more research. And with Paralives, I'm just not finding anything confirmed by the developers about vehicle gameplay. But again, I think I just might be a little lazy here, so feel free to correct me if I'm wrong in the comments section below. I will give you I will give you props, and I will absolutely give you thanks for doing that, of course. I don't mind being corrected once in a while here, especially if it leads to better discussions. Anyways, I think that vehicles are really a must when it comes to what the next generation of life simulation games should offer when it comes to its gameplay, especially if that video game is offering an open world. But like I mentioned before, with some of the upcoming life simulation games in production, there's room for doubt that the lessons that the Sims franchises have taught us about vehicular gameplay are being heeded and built upon. But what do you think? So these are just my thoughts on where life simulation games are getting it wrong. I cover more topics this go around because I really didn't get sidetracked by my rants on world creation, but I also don't think that I possibly could have thought of every gameplay mechanic that life simulation games are fumbling these days. So with that said, I am definitely looking at doing a part 3 like community or commentator version of this topic before I head off for the holidays. So please feel free to share your thoughts below. I am absolutely scouring the comment section for topics to continue discussing for the part 3 commentator edition. So I'm going to leave you with some questions here, as I usually do for these videos, and they are the following. Are gaming developers mistaking loading screens as a desired standard when in reality it was forced upon players? Will limiting lots kill worlds and positive reception of a life simulation game? Or maybe I got it wrong about the simmer community generally not wanting an online or microtransaction experience. Like I mentioned before, I would love to gather the comments on this video and from part 1 to make a commentator version, so feel free to drop your comment below with your thoughts. I just kindly ask that you're respectful. And until next time, I just want to thank you again for watching, and if you'd like to see more videos like this one, then feel free to like this video and consider subscribing if you haven't already. I just want to thank you for your time yet again. Happy holidays and Merry Christmas to all those watching, and please have yourself a wonderful day.